What we are doing is we're watching the discovery of master plan after master plan in real time, because we're watching a genius think aloud. I mean, he stands up on that stage and he's thinking about his concepts at the same time as those concepts are evolving in real time. The reason why the Starlink idea is now being shunted aside, I believe, this is my opinion, I could be wrong, probably am, is that it is now impossible to unthread Starlink from SpaceX when we consider that Starlink is just a stepping stone to data centers in the sky. And so the whole of the SpaceX mission is moving somewhat, or is being expanded somewhat to this notion of data centers in the sky, whether it's on the moon or in orbit. And there's something further that has to be said. The amount of money that has to be raised for this project is so gigantic that it's unclear to me that even private funding, which has reached incredible proportions in the United States, is sufficient. The boundaries now have shifted. The energy requirements he spoke about before was just for human living conditions. Now the boundaries have shifted, because when he's talking about reaching levels of superintelligence, he realizes that the energy requirements that he was dealing with before are far, far, far less than the energy. He's talking about magnitudes of improvement. And so everything changes. The chip technology, the energy technology, the space technology, and the convergence is now clear.
So Elon Musk recently posted on X saying, quote, "My companies are surprisingly, in some ways, trending towards convergence." Now that's a deeply profound statement, and few have really understood the long-term implications of what Elon meant. Today, I have Larry Goldberg joining me on Over the Horizon. Larry is a serial entrepreneur, co-inventor, author, and managing partner of Lumoscenti. Plus, he wears a lot more hats. He's one of the most experienced, insightful, and trusted voices in the Muskonomy investing community, and personally, one of my all-time favorites. So welcome, Larry. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you, Roy, and very kind of you to say so. And really, I only wear this hat, to be honest.
Okay, so there's so much happening in the Muskonomy, as we sometimes refer to it as. You're invested in so many of Elon's companies, and you have this unique insight over and above all of your investing experience in your life experience. And I've always found your words full of wisdom and your insights so deep and profound that I've been really itching to talk to you about this convergence. And I don't think people generally understand Elon Musk, the man, his impact on America, his impact on the world, and society at large, let alone the technologist and the futurist and the builder. Would you agree?
Yeah, this is a person, this is a human being that comes along. I was going to say once in a century, but honestly, if I look back in the century, the only person that possibly emerges of an equal to him is Edison, but even Edison pales in comparison. You'd have to go to, and some people tell me about Andrew Carnegie, but really speaking, if you look at the broad swath of what Elon is doing and what he is changing for us on Earth, you have to go back a lot further than that. He is the remarkable fusion of, entrepreneur, scientist, engineer, and visionary. Now, take all of those four dimensions and combine them in one person, and then add to that the ability to execute, then you get, this remarkable combination that I can't see where we've ever achieved that in one person before in history. And I'm a history, I've studied history for my entire life, and I just haven't seen that person yet. People talk about, Leonardo da Vinci, but da Vinci didn't achieve what Elon has achieved in practical terms. So you take any of these great men or women and you look at them, and some of them have got multiple dimensions or more than one dimension, but none that I've found, that I've racked my brains to found, have all the dimensions that Elon combines. He's not a perfect person. He's got a personality that some people don't appreciate. And he's got political views that other people don't appreciate. But you talk about these elements that combine in one person, and you have a remarkable human being, one of the most remarkable human beings in history.
Yeah. But it's his personality that makes him human.
Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, he's an alien for all
Yeah.
means and purposes.
Yeah. No, I love his personality. Others don't. Yeah. This is just a personal thing. I think I understand his personality because I come from some very similar background.
Yes, you do.
In many respects. And, I've watched him advance over the age of the last 3 decades. And, I think I have not a full understanding, but some understanding of what drives him. But that aside, when you look at this remarkable fusion of skill, intellect, and execution capabilities, or innate intelligence, you have to just understand that we're dealing with an N of 1 in the human experience.
Yeah. You touched upon sharing some background with Elon. Would you care to elaborate for my viewers who may not know very much about it?
Well, I was born in
Whatever
South
you're
Africa.
comfortable with. Yeah.
I was born in South Africa, as was he. I was born some years before him, probably about, I think I'm 25 years older than him. But nonetheless, we have shared experience in growing up in a white middle-class home in an apartheid South Africa, in a family that, stood to the left of the white South African experience, that had our sympathies opposed to the government, but nonetheless we had to comply and live within that realm.
The realities of it, yeah.
The realities, yeah. We both grew up going to white schools in South Africa, which were white public schools in South Africa, which were, as Elon has spoken many times, very violent places.
Right.
You would not see that in a playground here, but it would be pretty normal in a playground to have somebody being beaten up on a daily basis. I was a very small kid, as was Elon. He grew up. I didn't. He grew vertically. I didn't. And so I was bullied very badly. He was bullied very badly. He was bullied at a younger age than I was. I was bullied all the way up through high school. I think by the time he got to high school, he was, he could fend for himself. He often talks about being punched in the face as being one of the biggest wake-up calls. I got punched in the face more than once, and it's a very painful experience. So, identify. But the most important reason I identify with Elon is because I was completely focused on space exploration. I built a rocket as a child, as a young boy.
How cool is that?
Yeah, at the age of 12. There were no rocket kits that you could just assemble, and
Yeah,
boom,
yeah.
you're off. We had to actually turn it on the lathe. My cousin had a metal turning lathe, and his father was very experienced in that field, and we actually built it from scratch using aluminium tubing, aluminium blocks, and built the motor on very accurate dimensions. We built the nose cone out of wood. We brewed our own rocket fuel, saltpeter and sugar. I mean, and so, when I read about the South African back in, it wasn't even in 2000, it was in 1996 or 97, wanting to build a rocket, I immediately understood what he was doing. And so I started reading his blogs. He used to write these incredible, nobody understands that he's one of the best writers that you will find in any business management field anywhere on earth. I mean, he writes fluently and beautifully.
In fact, I think he's a far better writer than a speaker.
No, there's no doubt about it. His writing is beautiful, and those early blogs about SpaceX and Tesla are incredible. They are the stuff of a top level management course. How he dealt with rectifying Tesla from the early disasters that the original management took it into, they would be an absolute course on their own in a business school. And then, of course, how he explained each of the disasters, the first 3 Falcon 1 launches,
right?
A masterclass in how to be frank, honest, direct, and helpful, not only to the management but to the understanding of the direction and the focus of the company. So, he won my brain before he won my heart, but he has both.
Yeah. I think it's remarkable how he's been so consistently transparent and accountable, and he really puts himself out there.
Incredible.
And the amount of hate and criticism that he's got over these many years, it's superhuman in so many ways.
Well, I have a theorem about that.
All right, do tell.
I think hate is equal to the square root of the success. So the more success he has, and boy, there's nobody been more successful. And I had a blog about what his real net worth is, but nobody's been more successful than that. So the level of hate is, the square. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. But he also, he has a different yardstick for success, right?
Yeah.
Not like us.
Yeah. I mean, I've learned from him a lot. The most important is what is important in your business career. And nobody has given me the insight into the importance of achieving value for the human race in what you do. I pursued business out of the sense of needing to achieve greatness. And that has matured to an understanding of the value add to humanity that we can achieve by creating value. And he really caused this evolution, this maturation of my thinking. And I won't say that I'm mature yet. I'm still a young man, but reaching that point of understanding what we can achieve for the human race, out of what we do, that was an insight that took a long time in learning, and he, worked very hard at teaching me that. And so, you know,
I think
I
what you said
appreciate it.
there resonates with a lot of us in the Tesla investor community, and without as well, even though people may be rather grudging in admitting it. But I think he's changed social discourse. He's changed
Yeah.
political discourse in just deeply profound and far-reaching ways. And
Yeah,
I think that's a net positive.
Yeah, it's the most interesting transition because I remember going back to when they opened the factory, the gigafactory in Austin. There was a group of us, retail investors, that met. We had formed this group. We called ourselves Teslainaires or something similar. And we had a meeting, and we had a very interesting meeting with the senior manager from Tesla, one of the fellows who's at direct report to Elon. And he came to speak to us, and it was very pleasant. And in that meeting, somebody suggested that we all sign the Giving Pledge, at that time very popular, that had been promulgated, this idea of giving, all of your assets or all of your net worth to, some public good. And everybody, as I did, put up their hands and volunteered. But I think we've learned from Elon that is a really, really bad way to go forward. What we've learned is, firstly, what has been exposed is most of these non-governmental organizations, NGOs, most of these charitable organizations are really grifts of the worst kind. They're there, for the benefit of their promoters, no different from any private business, really. And very seldom actually does your contributions to them reach the intended target in any volume or any meaningful way.
Mhm.
And that actually the greater good is by doing, is by creating, is by building. And I illustrated this in a post recently when I showed how much money the Elon Musk enterprises are contributing to the value of the economy of the United States and indeed the world. Because the economic impact of Elon Musk on the US economy is profound. I don't know if there's a person on earth that in the period of time that Elon has been active in business has contributed as much to the American economy. I mean, it's quite possible that, Google and Microsoft, because of how long they've been about and how much they pay for in salaries, have contributed as much. But given the time that Elon has had, yet his contribution is profound. I mean, it is in the hundreds and hundreds of billions, maybe in the trillions. If you take, the total amount of money that his companies spend on salaries and on, purchasing and of contribution to the wealth of the world on an annual basis. And that's
I'm
the
gonna
value add that we can bring.
I'm gonna leave a link to that brilliant article of yours in the description below the video. So for those of you watching, please do check it out. It's as usual, Larry's deeply insightful, and it'll get you thinking in a different way. I think it's a very valuable piece of work to read and gain a better understanding of the maker ethos of Elon and his impact on America, the economy and society, etc. So you refer to the maker ethos, right? How does this, when you lay it over as a stencil over the convergence in the Muskonomy, how do you see that ethos guiding this convergence between Elon's companies into the future?
I mean, it's an overriding, this notion of perpetuating the human spirit, perpetuating humanity, and projecting humanity out to travel amongst the stars in order to perpetuate, the light of human consciousness, as he calls it. I don't remember when he started talking about this. So I think he's gone through, metamorphosis over time, as we all do as we mature, as we start considering our place in the universe. Well, many of us don't reach perhaps to the universe. We start thinking about our place in society. And then, that higher level of thought may occur to some. It certainly occurred to Elon. And I started seeing him talking in this way, maybe 10 years ago. He certainly 20 plus years ago talked about, going to Mars in order to set an example to us so that he would re-inspire this, the space exploration ethos that we had back in the 80s. In the 60s. God, it's amazing. 60s, right? I mean, it's incredible. Anyway, so if you read his writings from SpaceX back in 1980, you could already see these thoughts forming. You'd see these ideas occurring. So it goes back a way with him, a long way. But for me, it only started occurring as I soaked in his philosophy and started to understand it. So he's way ahead of us.
Oh yeah, for sure. But what I find, as you pointed out as well, what I find most intriguing is his ability to constantly evolve. It's as if we're going through different layers of the simulation along with Elon, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely matured, evolved his thinking, and he, it's one of his principles. I mean, if you look at the 5 principles or his 5 steps of his method, I mean, he's constantly second guessing himself, constantly reevaluating, and so that happens in his philosophical approach as well. But it's been
and he's doing it in real time on the global public square, that is X.
And he's talking a lot about it. And he often makes mistakes. It's in the nature of his method. I mean, he blows up rockets, but he also blows up ideas. He comes up with an idea, and in due course, after he essays it in very strong terms, he realizes, maybe this wasn't the right idea. Let's try this. So you have to take everything he says and weigh it and measure it, and stack it up with the rest, and then revisit it and question it. And it's the right thing to do. He is not without fault.
Oh, for sure. Let's just quickly go back to the shareholder meeting, and I want to play out a soundbite that I've cobbled together with some interesting, insightful bits from his responses in the question answer session.
This really is it's not just a new chapter for Tesla, it's a new book. And that new book is massively increasing vehicle production and ramping up Optimus production faster than anything's ever been ramped up before in history. I mean, the thing is that we actually have agreed to buy all the chips that are made from the fab, so it's basically a money printing machine for TSMC and Samsung. It's like literally, the faster you make the chips, the faster we send them money, but it's still not going at fast enough. So that's why I think, as far as I can see, the only option is to go build some very big chip fab. And then you got to solve memory and packaging too. So, but otherwise, you just tap out at whatever the chip production rate is. So I guess Terra would be, you'd want to say it's got to be at least 100,000 wafer starts per month size fab. And maybe that would be one of 10 in a complex. So it would ultimately be 1 million wafer starts per month. Yeah, exactly. You can tell when it gets the giggle factor, that's probably a good sign that we're onto something special. But I wouldn't be surprised if long term it's like 1 million wafers a month. Well, Optimus.
So just there in those two little clips, you kind of see the evolution of this convergence. And it almost seems to be, so Elon's been writing these master plans. But it seems to me that there's a grand master plan behind each of these master plans. And each of these master plans is a little piece of the puzzle that's coming together. And I don't know. I mean, you're far more insightful on this than many others in the community,
Well, let me
because you're
take,
also invested in so many of his companies.
yeah, let me
Is
take a
this?
slightly different take to your take.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure who's right or who's wrong, but I don't think there is a master plan of master plans. I think there is an evolving master plan.
Right.
I think that what happens is that Elon projects in his mind, takes that projection, turns that into a plan, and he's constantly second guessing it and second guessing it and second guessing it. And then he goes through the cycle again. And so each plan is really an evolution of the prior plan, an evolution of his thinking. Go back to the pandemic. And in the pandemic, 2021, we had this acute shortage of chips. And everybody said, oh, we've got to start a chip factory. We've got to start a chip factory. And I said, guys, stop with this chip factory business. It's crazy. The chips that you're short of are the cheapest, nastiest. Well, I didn't use those words, and that's hyperbole, but they are the very low cost, low tech stuff that you stuff into cars that in the door of the car, in each display on the car. I mean, each function gets its little chip, and they are very, very low tech chips. That is the worst business to be in the world.
Yeah, but
and Elon didn't even respond to all those posts about building a chip factory. He didn't even, it wasn't worth his attention. Fast forward 5 years. And what we're talking about is a chip factory to build the most advanced chips in the world. It's an entirely different proposition.
Yeah.
The reason I was opposed to chip factory is massive investment for a commodity item that you're never going to make any money out of. What he's talking about now is a massive investment in the most out there technology you can get, and highest level of innovation, highest level of risk, highest level of reward. It's an entirely different function.
Yeah, and tailor-made to Tesla's needs,
exactly,
as opposed to the more generic.
Well, not just
NVIDIA
Tesla's
chips.
needs, not just Tesla's needs, but embodied AI needs. Because not Tesla. He has. In Elon's mind, he's no longer thinking in company terms. We can talk about that. I think these companies are artificial boundaries right now.
Yeah, that's the convergence, right?
That's the convergence. He's thinking in terms of embodied AI. What does he need for embodied AI? He needs intelligence and he needs energy. Intelligence means that he needs energy, but intelligence and energy is really the focus. So energy, he's already had, some conversation about energy, his last master plan 4, but now he's thinking about intelligence and energy and how does he get there? And the boundaries now have shifted. The energy requirements he spoke about before was just for human living conditions. Now the boundaries have shifted because when he's talking about, reaching levels of superintelligence, he realizes that the energy requirements that he was dealing with before are far, far, far less than the energy. He's talking about magnitudes of improvement. And so everything changes. The chip technology, the energy technology, the space technology, and the convergence is now clear. So all I'm trying to say is that there was no master plan of master plans before this. There are master plans of master plans evolving.
This evolution of the convergence is so organic
Yes.
that it's a bit mind-bending,
Yes.
which is why I compare it to each master plan being a piece of the puzzle of the greater design,
Yeah.
the greater plan. And it's fascinating to watch this story evolve and be part of it.
Yeah, what we are doing is we're watching the discovery of master plan after master plan in real time. Because, we're seeing a genius, we're watching a genius think aloud. I mean, he stands up on that stage and he's thinking about his concepts at the same time as those concepts are evolving in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit crazy to think about it.
It
But
is crazy. It is crazy.
Okay, let's go back and listen to some more before we continue.
And I think Tesla vehicles will play a big role on the moon and Mars. So for a moon base and a Mars city, Tesla vehicles and Optimus robots are natural fit for building and operating a moon base and a Mars city. So, sorry?
Cybertruck also?
Yeah, it's Cybertruck. You will need to drive around in a pressurized vehicle if there's a person inside. But yeah, it'll be something cool. Next level moon buggy or Mars buggy. Unfortunately, over time, the parasitic load of being a public company has just grown over time, and so you get all these spurious lawsuits, obviously, and they just make it very difficult to operate effectively as a public company. But I do want to try to figure out some way for Tesla shareholders to participate in SpaceX. That would be very cool.
Yeah, it would be very cool indeed. And do you think that's going to happen this year? Oh, do you think that's going to happen? Let's start with that. And then when?
There's a very strong rumor that it's going to happen mid-2026.
Mid?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how much credence to put into the rumor. There was this post that, and I think it was Bloomberg that broke it, that SpaceX were looking to a public issue in mid-2026 at a valuation of $1.5 trillion.
Right.
And that Tesla was raising money now at an $800 billion valuation. And to which Elon replied, this is not true. Now, as usual, when Elon just makes this blanket assertion that the article is not true, you don't know which part of the article is not true.
Indeed,
And
yes.
as often, there are multiple statements in the article. He's focusing on the one statement, and his qualification in his post was that Tesla are not raising money. That SpaceX are not raising money right now. They've got plenty of liquidity. that they're selling stock, that from time to time they sell stock so that employees that get paid in
stock
effectively
options.
paid in stock get to sell those options to pre approved funds.
Accredited investors, etc.
Well, not only accredited investors, but groups of investors. So typically, it's a very wealthy investor and or a fund that has been pre-approved, and that Elon has worked with for some years because he's very cautious about who he allows to invest in his company. So I think that the piece that he was saying was not true, was that SpaceX was raising money, and he specifically said that SpaceX are not raising money. So I put a lot of credence in. Now, a couple of things I want to say. I put a lot of credibility in the rumor that SpaceX is contemplating some form of public issue in mid of 2026.
Okay.
Some people claim it's going to be just Starlink. Some people claim it's going to be SpaceX.
Well, Starlink is, I think, what everybody was expecting, right? Because I think it was a couple of years back when he first said that Starlink would be the one that they'd spin off, and then somebody asked him to find a way to ensure that Tesla long-term Tesla shareholders would get a beneficial entry point into that, and he said yes, he would try and do something. So I think everybody has been waiting for the Starlink IPO, and this has been a bit of a surprise, a SpaceX IPO.
Yeah, the reason why the Starlink idea is now being shunted aside, I believe, this is my opinion, I could be wrong, probably am, is that it is now impossible to unthread Starlink from SpaceX when we consider that Starlink is just a stepping stone to data centers in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole of the SpaceX mission is moving somewhat, or is being expanded somewhat to this notion of data centers in the sky, whether it's on the moon or in orbit. And so if you think about it, it's incredibly difficult to unthread the pieces of Starlink from that. And there's something further that has to be said. The amount of money that has to be raised for this project is so gigantic that it's unclear to me that even private funding, which has reached incredible proportions in the United States, is sufficient.
So here's the rub. This is, you say it's incredibly difficult to disentangle Starlink from SpaceX. I would suggest that it's becoming incredibly difficult to disentangle Tesla from Starlink, from SpaceX, from all its companies.
No doubt.
Right?
And that's the reason that I proposed what I did propose. Firstly, you have to understand that Elon's principal concern at the moment, he's the biggest risk factor. If you were to list all the risk factors that he's contemplating, the biggest risk factor, I believe, is this problem of being a public company and having to deal with the issues of what he calls the friction.
Yeah.
But the fact is, he has a public company right now, and it's Tesla. And he has that.
But we've seen the ups and downs. We've seen the pain.
Yeah.
We've seen the political agendas. We've seen the short sellers and their agenda. Is it perhaps asking for too much trouble?
Well, the answer is that he doesn't have a choice.
Why?
Because three reasons. The first is there's an absolute limit to the number of shareholders you can have in a private company in the United States.
Right.
And we're going to be reaching that absolute limit to fund what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, from a financial point of view, only the public markets are deep enough and broad enough to sustain the kinds of investments that he's now contemplating.
Yeah.
And the third reason is that he has a public company already, and he can establish a structure. And I've essayed that structure in my article. He can establish a structure that gives him the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
He can take control of all his private companies from his existing public company he can take a direct ownership in all of his private companies from his public company, and that would increase his control of his public company while not giving up control of the private companies, and giving him a pathway to fund those private companies from his public company, and a pathway to maintain control of his entire empire.
So would it be like a holding company, an umbrella holding company?
Tesla is such a thing. It already owns the car company, it already owns the robotics company, it already owns the FSD company, it already
And it will
owns the
own
RoboCab,
Terrafab.
and all of the above. It already owns those pieces.
Right.
The problem is he doesn't control it yet.
Right.
He only has potential control of it. The other companies he controls absolutely. In SpaceX, he's got a golden share.
XAI.
In XAI,
Boring company. Neuralink.
So he already has control of these other companies. What he doesn't have is access to public markets. He has access to large private markets, but not to public markets. So my proposal to do this gigafab or terafab and to do the data centers in the sky and on the moon and go to Mars and create a flywheel of cash enough to take us to Mars is the following: to have Tesla acquire shares in each one of these private companies, sufficient that it has a meaningful stake in each of those companies, a meaningful enough stake to provide continuing capital to those companies, but insufficient stake to take control out of Elon's hands. And the numbers are very compelling, because if you look at an acquisition of those companies, SpaceX is now worth $800 billion.
Yeah. Or will be worth 800 billion. It is. Okay.
And I have absolute proof of that. And the absolute proof is, if you look at the valuation that the investors in SpaceX have placed, the public investors in SpaceX have placed on their shares in SpaceX, i.e. Barron Founders Fund, they've just stepped up their valuation to that $800 billion mark. So it's a done deal. So that part of the article in Bloomberg was accurate. And we have third-party evidence, clear third-party unassailable evidence of that. So yes, SpaceX is now worth $800 billion. XAI is now worth $230 billion. And I have knowledge of that. I'm not going to talk about where I get knowledge, but it's in the marketplace and it's been published. And then Neuralink, it's much smaller, and Boring Company are much smaller. They really don't amount to, but he has golden shares in each of those companies. I don't know whether he has in Neuralink and Boring Company. I'm not aware of that, but certainly in XAI and in SpaceX. So if he takes a meaningful share of each of those companies, exchanges them for Tesla stock that he will receive the bulk of in each case. He can afford to give up a lot in SpaceX because he has the golden share and so on and so on and so forth. So what that does is going to expand the capital value of Tesla dramatically. And it's not going to reduce the value of the shares. It may increase the value of shares quite significantly, but it will also give us direct access, and it will make negotiations and it will make contractual terms between those companies a lot easier to come to on a lot clearer basis and a lot more transparent basis. And I think that would be the solution to the architecture that would support like a terafab and so on and so forth.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because so far we've been thinking of Starlink being that flywheel that propels SpaceX to the moon, Mars, build out the in-space economy. But as you've pointed out as well, it's evident that Tesla is increasingly growing into that role. Do you think it's time for Tesla to if SpaceX were to IPO, would Tesla then pick up let's say a 20-25% stake in that?
No, I think Tesla should acquire the stake before the IPO and then allow the IPO. But the reality is the IPO won't be offering stock. They'll simply be putting existing shares
right.
They'll simply be listing existing shares that people already have. But you know, the capital required for all of that we're talking about is gigantic.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about total capital needs. In my article, I spell it out, about $1.2 trillion.
Trillions, yes.
There's not a single one of those companies alone that can raise that.
Yeah.
Certainly not SpaceX, probably not Tesla. But combine all 5 companies, and you definitely have the means to raise that 1.2 trillion over time.
But then that would require a Tesla shareholder vote, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure that any of those programs would require a shareholder vote. But the acquisition would require a shareholder vote. But you'd get
yeah, I mean,
easily get the 70%. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Perhaps even more than 80.
But you know, the acquisition.
I mean, which institutional investor is going to say no?
Yeah, but the acquisition would increase Elon's ownership, even ahead of him earning those options. And by the way, it would have another very nice impact. It would speed up the rate of earnings of the company and his earning and his
the milestones he needs to hit. Yeah. When I first kind of got a sense of this new compensation plan, it was kind of underwhelming for me a bit, to be honest. Reason being, it wasn't ambitious enough. And for me, no, I'll be honest, for me, this can so easily be met by 2029, 2030. I mean, look at what he did with the last one. And it just seems as if it wasn't grand enough to match his ambitions and this convergence that we're moving towards with these companies. And I said it right there and then. I think this is just an interim plan, and that we're going to see some new form of it in one way or another by 2030 or 2032.
Well, let's separate 2 things. Let's separate the business plan from the whole issue of compensation. This is what you see in this compensation plan is not a business plan. It is just targets that have to be reached for Elon to earn the money.
Exactly.
And you have to think that those targets are not the end of Elon's ambitions. So don't read the plan to be anything but Elon's compensation, a way to get Elon paid in such a way that he can get control back of Tesla.
Control, yeah, because it's always been more about control rather than
Yeah, and so you don't want to
payment.
set those targets so high as he's not going to reach them.
Yeah,
And you have to understand that his targets probably exceed that.
yeah,
If you
for sure.
combine these 5 companies, you change the targets so dramatically. Now, I'm not thinking about one big company. I'm thinking about Tesla becoming a holding company, owning shares of these companies, and possibly even spinning off parts of
I
itself.
see. So you're saying Tesla becomes the holding company?
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
it's already a holding company of multiple
In so
different,
many ways,
in
yes.
so many, and it has 100% ownership of each of
Yeah.
those companies: the robotics
Yeah.
company, the AI company,
Yeah.
the car manufacturing company, and the robotaxi company, and
Yeah.
the energy
I mean,
company.
I
Each of
get
those
asked
5 could
so
be spun off.
often. I
Each
get
of
asked
those
so.
5 could,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
continue. Go ahead,
Each of
please.
those 5 could be spun off into public companies in which Tesla holds the majority, and that would just repeat the pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. I point I was saying was I get asked so often by my friends why I've got between 90 to 100% of my investment in Tesla, and I say it's not just one company. I'm investing in one company that's actually 14 or 15 different companies. So I've got an entire portfolio. It's just that it's under Tesla. And
So
I mean, the way I look at it now is I'm not only looking at the on world or the Earth economy. I'm also looking at the off world economy because it's time to do that, right?
Right.
If you look at it in 5-year plans, from 2025 to 2030, you have to factor in the off-world economy, whether that is in space, whether that's on the moon, and perhaps even on Mars. And when you look at that, the way I think of Tesla and SpaceX and this convergence of the Muskonomy is in terms of infrastructure verticals. I look at it as transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, intelligence as infrastructure, communications as infrastructure. When I say transport as
Energy is
infrastructure, I mean on
infrastructure.
surface, in space, etc., and labor as an infrastructure,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when you think of it in that way, it is so profound, it is so transformational that it's kind of my mind kind of starts melting, because how do you begin? And I interviewed the guys at Mark 33 a couple of months back where they brought out their Tesla valuation for 2030. And I
Right.
think it was 1.3 trillion. And I was like, hang on, you're not, there are many missing pieces in this. How do you, and I laid them out and I explained why. And I said, how do you then begin to model something like that? And I ask you now, when you look at this convergence between all of Elon's companies, and you look at each of these critical verticals, infrastructure verticals, for not only transforming the global economy on Earth, but also in space, on Moon, on the Mars. How do you begin to model that out in your head?
I think you do it at the highest level. So I did a sort of business plan and a model, and I said, how much capital will each of these arms of this beast require? So orbital compute, which combines data and energy, I estimated about 700 billion. And how do I get that? About $100, about $100 million per gigawatt, scaling to 7 gigawatts. I mean, Elon's talked about larger numbers than that, but I'm taking a 5 to 10 year horizon. The gigafab, I mean, I'm looking at, public filings from, fab companies, and I come up with a $30 billion build and about a $95 billion sustaining investment. So that's 125 billion.
Are you looking at those numbers at par? Because there would be cost advantages for Tesla there.
I'm looking at the numbers based upon industry experience. If Tesla is able to squeeze cost advantages out, that's fine, but that's not the way to plan. Then when I look at the cybercab fleet, at a $25,000 bill of materials for a cybercab, we're looking at $175 billion.
Yeah.
And then if we look at the Optimus fleet, say 1 million by 2027, I'm taking Elon's number, 7 million annual ramp, that's $210 billion. What is that total? Just those 4 line items, right? 4 line items. I haven't included like the investment in, Grok, and I haven't included, the investment in FSD. I think those are relatively minor compared to what we're talking about. I haven't included the investment in Starliner. I mean, these are somewhat subsumed in these broader line items, but we're at $1.2 trillion.
Yeah.
1.2 trillion. We've got $50 billion in the bank at Tesla. I mean, we're looking for $1.2 trillion. This changes the calculus. You can't do like a Microsoft level go to the financial markets. You can't do a Apple like go to the public markets. This is an order of magnitude greater than that. Yeah. So without the right financial structure, finding that cash is no longer appealing to private equity and public and you've got to go to the public markets.
Yeah, but then there's also the question of governance and control, right? So how do you balance that out?
Well, I proposed a method of governance and control that would leave Elon in absolute control of all the subsidiaries while he is gathering absolute control of Tesla. Because the first stage of my plan, Tesla does not take control of these companies. It takes the largest single minority stake that still leaves Elon in control. And that gives them a large enough minority stake that they publicly will be consolidated into Tesla's accounts. So during this period that he's earning out absolute or 25% control of Tesla, this gives him a jump towards that control outside of his compensation plan, but while leaving him in absolute control of these subsidiaries. And in due course, as these subsidiaries grow dramatically in value, Tesla can acquire more and more of their stock to where Tesla becomes a true holding company. If that's even necessary, I don't see it's necessary. I think that this structure would have a lot of resilience over time and maybe the structure that they move forward with. This may be a very technical conversation, and I may have lost a lot of people along the way, but there is a way for Tesla to acquire a sufficient, meaningful shareholding in each of these companies such that it becomes possible to consolidate operations on a much more formal and resilient basis. That's the bottom line.
Well, here's my offer to you right away. Anytime you're ready, I'm more than happy to do a technical deep dive. Just nerd out on the numbers.
Okay.
Because this is fascinating. It's a brilliant idea. It's fascinating, very intriguing. And it has a few red flags, not because of the way it's being thought of, but because of the implications for society and governance at large and politics. And that, to be honest, is my biggest fear. What happens if you don't have a favorable dispensation in Washington? We know Elon's been targeted in the past. We've seen how brutal it gets, how dirty it gets. There's a lot at risk, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risk. It's what keeps every Tesla investor awake at night. The truth is that there's a lot of people that hate Elon for his politics, hate Elon for his wealth, hate Elon for his creativity. There's some people that believe that he's a Nazi and a fascist, for which there's no evidence at all. But it really speaks to the fissures within our society rather than a reflection at all on Elon.
For sure. But I suspect that as these verticals in his companies, these infrastructure verticals become reality, there's going to be a lot of people very fearful of the amount of influence and control he wields over the future of humanity as a collective.
Yeah, it's a paradox. We've got to give him control because we know it won't happen without him having control, but we don't
right.
want to give him control because of our fear of a single person controlling all of this. So it's a great paradox. I have this great faith in Elon because I believe in the goodness of his heart. A lot of people believe that he's evil in his heart, because he's rich. I mean, there are people who just believe rich people are evil people, and B, because he has political views that may be at odds with them. And C, because he competes with a lot of people. A lot of people are in competition with him. He touches a lot of lives. I don't know what the fix is for that. I'm not sure there is a fix. History is replete with people who have been destroyed because they are doing good, and there are other people who have been destroyed because they're doing well. So I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has the answer to that. There's this growing mistrust that's quite palpable uh, about the tech bros and their influence over Washington and the Trump administration for now, and then perhaps the next couple of administrations. And I wonder, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, how that's going to play out. Because societies and people tend to be fearful of what they don't understand. And to me, that's more of boiling down to transparency. Elon is extremely transparent, but I'm not sure how, as a collective, the tech bros are transparent and accountable, or perceived as transparent and accountable, and thereby trustworthy. Because there seems to be an evolution of political and social structures fueled by economic changes that's almost inevitable. And people generally, um, and obviously I'm not talking about the Tesla investor community here, because most of us are kind of bought into this whole idea, understand it, some more, some less. But those outside the community tend to be fearful, and that too many changes are happening too quickly for society to adjust. And the cadence of this is only going to increase. And that, to me, is one of the biggest risks to this age of abundance, bigger than war, to be honest.
Yeah, we're living through very fraught times, and we've been through. I mean, if you look at the last 7 years, the Me Too movement, the racist rhetoric of DEI and Black Lives Matter, and these pseudo philosophies of who has. I mean, this whole. I think that this is an age that we'll look back and laugh at in 5 to 7 years' time when we've
Hopefully.
gone through. Yeah,
Hopefully.
well, I've lived through so many different. When I look back, I became politically aware in the early 60s. I came to the United States because I was so enthralled by John Kennedy's clarion call. That's what brought me here. So I've seen all the ups and downs along the way, and somehow we always come back to the center, even if it's just in passing on our way to one extreme or the other. So I'm less pessimistic than many people, but I'm a little bit older and probably will not see the whole story play out. But we have to play the game that we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
We have to pursue the reality. We have to pursue our dreams within the reality of the moment, of our moment. And so all that you say is true, and it's all and it enunciates well the risk and the dangers. And I say yes, but it's temporary. We'll see this flux and evolve, but what is permanent is what we're building. And so I focus on the build.
Do you think the Democrats will play ball come 2028 if they do win?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer because there's no such thing as the Democrats. There's a very wide dispersion of views amongst the Democrats. So, will the left wing of this current Democratic Party become successful in putting up a candidate, and will that candidate win? Or will this wing of the Republican Party, which is currently in control, will it have a candidate that's sufficiently compelling to defeat the candidate, whichever part of the Democratic Party comes up? And the variability of those questions are so great that I don't even give it thought.
How do you look at the Trump administration's efforts to kind of pull America into the 21st century, kicking and screaming, perhaps even further?
A lot of people are crying that Trump is trying to pull them back to the 19th century, kicking and screaming. They're trying to pull him to Teddy Roosevelt's time and before. So, and I take a different view. I think that the Trump administration is definitely the most radical regime we've had, certainly since Reagan and perhaps since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, probably since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Reagan did a half job. I think Trump is attempting to redress fully the changes that Roosevelt made, which turned out to be really, I think, a very poor change in direction, not necessarily for what he did, but what Johnson, Nixon, Carter, and I guess there was Ford in the middle, those four presidents did. They were four of the worst presidents in like hundreds of years, but that they came in a stream. They completely, reversed everything that Kennedy was trying to do, and they implemented the Roosevelt changes on into a perpetual mode for this country, and we are suffering ever since. The question
I'm
is,
surprised you didn't name Clinton and Obama.
No, actually, Clinton was a very good president. I think Clinton was an excellent president. Clinton shrank the federal government more than even Reagan did. Clinton shrank bureaucratic rules as much as Reagan. Clinton balanced the budget. Clinton set a great platform for the future. So I disagree. I have a very profound respect for Clinton, not for Hillary Clinton, but for Bill Clinton. Obviously he has some personal problems, but that aside, if you look at his actual record, it's really pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
But Obama, you're right. I mean, Obama and Biden were catastrophic. And, if you look at Trump's first term, his first couple of years were really excellent. It was the pandemic that completely obliterated his record, and he didn't perform that well. He did some very good things in the pandemic, but he allowed himself to be led by the nose by some of the ideologues. But be that as it may.
And I think he realizes that.
Yeah, and the Biden administration was catastrophic. I mean, that truly was catastrophic. That was presidency by the bureaucracy. And I am hoping that this Supreme Court recognizes the danger that this bureaucracy and administration, that this departure from the Constitution that has happened since the Roosevelt years and continuously advanced since the Roosevelt years is not constitutional, is anti-constitutional, and I hope they bring us back to the Constitution, particularly in this decision regarding these so-called independent agencies. There is nowhere in the Constitution that defines an independent agency. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I'm really hoping the Supreme Court will bring us back to the center, to where we were before Roosevelt started all of these changes. So that's my historic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I believe John F. Kennedy would be turning in his grave if he saw what was done with his AID bill. Listen, I wasn't here yet in the United States when the AID bill was proposed and the agency was created, but I lived in the house of the man who wrote that bill and who shepherded that bill through Congress. He ultimately became the senior judge on the Tax Court of Appeals, which is the highest appeal court for taxation in this country. But he was a brilliant man. Ted Tannenwald was his name, and he was seconded by Kennedy to write that bill. And I stayed in his house for my senior year in high school, and learned a lot from him. And I will tell you that AID and what it did doesn't even represent the beginning of what he wrote. And that has been the arc of all of this, this legislation, the social legislation that Congress has passed over these years. Anyway, long story short, I'm hoping that this Supreme Court and this presidency makes a profound change on the direction of the country.
I get the sense, and we know that legislation always follows or lags behind technological advancements.
Yeah.
It's done so consistently over the past many decades. But this is a different transformation we're talking about as we're entering the age of abundance. Let's focus on America first. You have serious demographic problems, social problems, labor problems, educational problems. I'm quite surprised at the level and the standard of education in America when compared to the rest of the world when it comes to the sciences.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. This age of abundance, this convergence in Elon's companies is going to fuel this age of abundance in ways that are so transformative and so impactful that we've never seen anything like it before. I like to think of the two main pillars. That's the unit cost of intelligence and the unit cost of labor, both being reduced to such low levels that the age of abundance then becomes reality when anyone can have anything that they desire, as Elon often says. But it has deep and profound social ramifications, implications, and it seems that American society is not ready for it. The Trump administration, to me, appears to be doing what is necessary to support it because it realizes that on the global stage, China is already doing all of this, and China can do a lot more because of the structure of governance in China. America is still a democracy, and so it obviously works differently. But there's this realization, there's this clarion call now, and we see Trump bringing out these executive orders, one of which, at the time of recording this conversation with you, we're still awaiting the executive order on AI, which I imagine would kind of be an umbrella executive order for robotics, etc., supply chains, energy, data centers, all of that. How do you square American society with these profound changes that are taking place technologically, economically, and administratively? Can American society understand and come to terms with these changes and adapt quickly enough? Or are there going to be serious repercussions and a deepening divide?
Look, I'm only approaching my 80th birthday, so I'm a young man, a very short experience. But if I go back over the hundreds of years of American history, we're always at the point of crisis. We're always at a point where it looks like society is about to tear itself apart. And we have torn ourselves apart from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And we always look as if, we're failing terribly at so many things. And yet the next age occurs and we say, oh my goodness, we got through that. Oh, look what happened. Oh, look at the growth. Look, we're ahead of the rest of the world. So I think we're in crisis, which is normal state of affairs in America for its 400 years of existence. I think the green shoots of the next reason for American society to become, great have already sprouted. I think they're always sprouting amongst the mulch and the decadence and the disintegration of the previous age. And I have the highest confidence, highest level of confidence. And I said I'm only a young man, but highest level of confidence from my little bit of experience, which is only like less than 20% of the time that America's existed, that we will overcome these problems and we will arise again. And just remember that you're looking at the broad numbers. Within those broad numbers, there are communities of outstanding ability. There are communities of outstanding functionality. There are units of outstanding productivity. So, yeah, if you look across the whole swath, if you look at the landscape as a whole, doesn't look great. But if you zoom in, you will see these green shoots or these centers of excellence or these centers of outstanding result. And you only have to look at Elon's companies. You only have to look at Google. You only have to look at Microsoft. You only have to look at, NVIDIA. You only have to look at the creativity and productivity of the American ethos and how it, bubbles up and creates these outstanding opportunities. I talked about green shoots. I talked about blah, blah, blah. I don't know. These images get a little bit fuzzy and confusing, but I have incredible confidence and a huge amount of confidence in our ability to do great things. And I see it myself. I'm an investor. I have a little venture fund. We see extraordinary work being done by individuals, putting their own, all they have in the world into what they do, and they're creating these incredible futures for themselves and for society as a whole.
So America as a land of promise is still alive.
The promise is so alive. It's more alive now than you could ever believe, and in the most surprising of places. And for all the bad stories, and by the way, all through the years that I've been here, all the way back to the years of Kennedy, even through the 4 bad presidents, and going on to, 1 or 2 really bad ones that followed, I've seen this resilience, this ability to suddenly pop out of the ground and build this gigantic tree. It's happening all the time. Listen, in 2000, we had this terrible crash of the internet, and people were talking exactly like you're talking now. The end of the world is the end of America, is saying blah 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 blah. And I was saying, guys, we're at the beginning of the most incredible period of American history.
Yeah, but rarely before. I mean, there's the anti-war protest during Vietnam, etc. There's a civil rights movement and all. But it seems that this divide, the social divide in America, is extremely bitter.
It's
and
always
it's
been. I mean,
unprecedented in so many ways.
Were you around in the Nixon years? Were you around in the Vietnam War years? You were a very young man. I will tell you, the divide was much more bitter, and what was happening in the streets was much worse. So no, you're wrong. I mean, America's been here before.
That's encouraging to hear.
Living through it makes it more real. You have to read it in history. It wasn't so bad. A little bit of protest. No, it was rioting in the streets. People living in tents, on the mall. I mean, people shooting soldiers in the back. I mean, things were really bad, really bad. Anyway, I'm very optimistic for the future.
Yeah, it's good to hear that you are. Let's zoom out a bit. We live in a bipolar world, whether we like it or not, right? And it seems that America and China are caught in this Thucydides trap. Again, whether they like it or not. Elon seems to be transcendental. He transcends geographical boundaries, and he seems to be an individual, a leader whose companies bind countries together, whether it is Starlink, whether it is Tesla, whether it's SpaceX. As we look out in the future of humanity amongst the stars, there are a lot of questions about what this means for the future of humanity. When we reach Mars, what sort of a governance structure will there be? So there's this contradiction between a man who's bringing countries together through his companies and his technology, and at the same time, perhaps creating a lot of fear, whether it's amongst his competitors, obviously, or competing nations. We've seen Starlink face so many hurdles when it comes to getting downlink licenses across African countries, Asian countries. China hasn't given Starlink a downlink license. How do you see all this playing out?
China's a really difficult problem for the United States, in the sense that the US would love to have partnered with China, but partnership in China is not a concept. It's not the same concept for China as it is for the United States. In the United States, both partners are reasonably ambitious for the partnership as a whole, but also somewhat ambitious for each individual. In China, partnership means I only win if you lose, but I have to use you to get to the winning position. That's what your partnership means, and that is how they've partnered in Hong Kong with the British. That's how they've partnered with every company. You look at GM and Ford in their partnerships. If you look at any of the chip companies and their partnerships, I mean, if you look at the Taiwanese manufacturing companies that brought manufacturing to China, and now China is looking to invade and take over Taiwan. If you look at Apple, I mean, Apple is the worst example that we could think of, because Apple really brought skilled manufacturing and large scale at scale into China. They taught China how to manufacture high-tech products, the highest tech product at the lowest cost, and they taught it at enormous expense to themselves in terms of their own future. Apple did.
Well, you can thank Bill Clinton for that.
Well, you can thank a lot of people for that, but I personally blame the current CEO of Apple. But if you look at how Elon partnered with China, it was very interesting. I mean, Elon is one of the few people that has actually partnered in China, but he went into China with eyes wide open and made an offer that they couldn't refuse. And I think both have benefited enormously out of it. And, the interesting thing is they think they've won because they've certainly won the EV race.
Yeah.
But they probably have lost because they've probably lost the FSD, the autonomy race. And so it's quite clear that there are going to be two winners in autonomy in the ride-hailing business, and that is China and Tesla. And of course, a lot of people don't understand that yet. They have their own. Morgan Stanley yesterday published a piece that showed Waymo as having like the largest share of the ride-hail market, and Tesla down.
So
these guys, I don't know what they're smoking. Anyway, bottom line is, Elon understands China better than any other Western mind in terms of the deal that he struck with China and the relationship he has maintained with China. Nobody understands it. I mean, we see article after article published about how Elon has been fooled by China. We don't see anybody evaluating the deal he did with China and where he stands and how much it has done for Tesla.
Yeah.
So, but the answer to your question about China is that the jury's out as to whether they will survive and whether they will prosper. They certainly have prospered, but they're in a very great state of change right now. Does that lead them to war? Does that lead them to ultimately come to a partnership position? I don't know, and nobody knows the answer, least of all the Chinese themselves.
Yeah, just at the risk of playing devil's advocate, I would suggest that a lot of people in America, whether it's business leaders or politicians, also or strategists, don't really understand China and the way they think. China is a civilization that's been around for thousands of years, and they have a very different worldview. And I would tend to think that China would look at America and say, well, you've just been around for a few hundred years, and we've been around for thousands of years. I think there is a certain lack of understanding, lack of depth in understanding the Chinese mentality and the Chinese psyche. And it's not just America, but in Europe and other parts of the world as well. But you make a very valid point when you touch upon Elon's success in deal making with China and the way he's approached them.
I would also like to say that I'm not sure this view of China as a 1,000-year-old or multi-thousand-year, or 1,000-year-old, sorry, it's not multi-thousand, but a 1,000-year-old civilization really stands scrutiny. I think China became a new world after the revolution, after the Red Revolution, or after the Reds won the battle and then went into the Maoist period of social upheaval. I think China has got a different history, but I think their history is more informed by the social upheaval led by Mao Zedong. than it is by its 1,000-year history.
Yeah, but often enough, it's not about the realities of what they are, but about how they perceive themselves.
But I think that if the Chinese perception of themselves and their consciousness is more informed by the recent history than the past history. That's my view. And I'm not speaking as a Chinese expert, anything like a Chinese expert. It's just my impression.
Sure.
You know, I'm a history buff. I've studied history my entire life. And I don't have a deep knowledge of Chinese history. I have a very deep knowledge of European and American history, and South African history. But that informs one of social change and economic change, and how events influence them. And my overwhelming experience of the little I know of China is that the Chinese view of the world is more informed by what they've been through in modern times than what they inherited.
To just extend that thought into Europe, and we're seeing Europe with a lot of its problems, societal, demographic, labor, etc. China's ambitions with AI and robotics are pretty clear. They want to be the dominant labor supplier to Europe. And that's a geopolitical threat to America over and above everything else. That's a threat to Europe itself. Because if you have an entity like China controlling your intelligence, your unit cost of intelligence, and your unit cost of labor, you've outsourced your existence in so many ways to that entity.
That's the least of Europe's problems.
Oh, for sure. But since we're talking about this convergence, what are your thoughts on that? Because again, when you come to the age of abundance, it's again energy, labor, intelligence, without which you don't enter the age of abundance. And Europe is in trouble.
Like JD Vance, I've kind of lost confidence in Europe, its ability to actually rationalize, not its ability to rationalize, its ability to ratiocinate, to actually think through the problem, to actually deal with the reality of the problem. They are so, the powers that exist in most of Western Europe, or a lot of Western Europe and the UK, are so taken with these philosophical thoughts that they are destroying themselves in a practical sense. Demographically, they're destroying themselves, and financially and economically, they're destroying themselves. And, we so desperately need European Maggie Thatcher. We so desperately need British Trump. I mean, we may have one coming, but in Europe, I've lost.
I hope you're not betting on Nigel Farage.
Well, I'm not betting on him, but I think he's on his way to the top of the pile there. It's pretty clear that he's going to win the next election.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate that it would be Nigel Farage and not someone more. I don't know what the word is, but
I think we said that about Trump, didn't we?
Well,
in 1916.
Yes.
2016. In 2016. I bet you if we had had this conversation, we'd be saying exactly the same thing about Trump as we're saying about Farage now. I don't know a thing about Nigel. I don't know a thing about Nigel Farage. Nothing. I listened to one press conference he held just the other day. First time I've listened to him at any length. So I don't know. I have no idea about the man. You probably have a better understanding of him than I do. But I tell you, could not do worse than this lot, than the lot they presently have. It would be very, very hard to do any worse than the lot they presently have, or any lot they've had since I don't know when, since Maggie Thatcher.
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting to see if Rishi Sunak switches, because amongst the latest lot, he was perhaps the most in touch with reality. And I'm not just saying that because he's of Indian origin and I'm Indian, but because of his economic policies. And he warned about what would happen with taxation, etc.
Yeah.
How important is Elon and his companies and the convergence to Europe?
Europe is so far gone from a political point of view that Elon is kind of a non-person in Europe to a very large percent. Actually, the interesting thing is a very large percentage of the population actually adore Elon Musk.
Yeah.
But they have been, their political influence has been removed from them. Look, Europe is not a democracy. Very few democracies in Europe. Germany is not a democracy. Great Britain is not a democracy. France is not a democracy.
France is not, yeah.
So all the traditional countries in Europe are not democratic. They don't represent democratic values. And, you have the powers that be are very, very opposed to Elon. And many of the people, even though they may not be a majority, but many people have taken on this view of Elon. So Europe is a lost continent for Elon, I think, even though, they still sell cars there. And even though I meet many people from Europe and receive a lot of correspondence from European people telling me how much they like Elon, but they have no political power. They've become voiceless.
X has seen some record downloads across Europe. So that's interesting. But the reason I ask you that, Larry, is because of this post of yours, which really stood out for me. I think you were responding to Willie, and you say the fuss, Willie, is the blood and treasure the US sank into rescuing Europe from evil autocracies on both the right and the left in the 20th century, only to watch it beginning to fall into the old, really bad ways again, while we continue to spend trillions to provide a defensive shield for them. People are so ignorant of history. I think that was profound, and not many people are thinking of why the Trump administration and so many people in America are speaking out about when it comes to their concerns about what's happening in Europe.
Look, America poured gigantic treasure into Russia to support Russia during World War II after Stalin had already stabbed Britain in the back. America poured enormous treasure into the Allies, firstly into Britain and then ultimately, the other allies that, like the Soviet Union, that allied with her, and then sent men to war, both in the Far East and in Europe, but sent men to Europe. They certainly didn't suffer the most of the casualties, but they suffered quite a few casualties. And they sent men to North Africa, men to Europe. And ultimately, and more importantly, even than their contributions during the war, they poured gigantic treasure into Europe post-war. Gigantic treasure. I mean, at the time that it was proposed, nobody had ever heard of those kind of sums in their experience. And what it evolved was a Europe that was always on the brink of socialism, that was always on the brink of failure. And, America helped promote this idea of a United States of Europe. And what has evolved from that is the most incredibly dysfunctional society you can imagine. A society where they close down all the atomic energy plants in Germany and destroy what has become the miracle of Germany. A continent that has set up both tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers against its savior. I mean, the United States had the lowest tariffs of any country in the world with every country in the world. And every country kept erecting barrier after barrier after barrier, most of it non-tariff, but tariff as well, against the United States. And Europe was the worst offender of all, after having sucked the blood and treasure of the United States to defeat Russia, and before that to defeat the Nazis. So I love Europe. I spent 3-4 months in Europe the year before last. I mean, the year before last. I love living in Europe. I love the wine, I love the food, and I love the
culture,
the ease of living in the country.
Yeah.
But my goodness me, I mean, this is a very, very, very dysfunctional society. It's not so true in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe are a little bit better off.
Yeah. There are pockets like Hungary as well.
Well,
They're
Hungary,
holding
I
out.
think, went a little bit too far to the right for my comfort.
Yeah.
I prefer.
But I suppose they had to contrast what was happening in the
I
West.
don't know about that. I think their leader is. I think that he has tendencies that are not very good. And look, it's very hard to find a balance. But
Yeah.
Poland is probably well off. I don't know. I mean, I don't study it enough. Although I know Central Europe very well because my people come from Lithuania and Latvia, and so I've visited those countries, and I visited Poland where so many of my people were slaughtered. So I understand a lot more about those countries than 99% of the American population, or for that matter, European population, or the Western European population.
Larry, do you think it's time for Bretton Woods Part 2, given
Yeah.
this convergence?
Yeah. I mean, monetary conditions are going to have to change. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, I think, but Bretton Woods Part 2 is going to be as fraught and as difficult as Bretton Woods Part 1.
But Part 1 did lay the foundations and set out the blueprint for the world as we know it today.
Somewhat.
To a great extent, I would say. Freedom of the seas. You wouldn't have any of the globalization without freedom of the seas. You wouldn't have. You'd still have European countries squabbling with each other. You wouldn't have. I mean, and that would be true for neighbors across the world.
Yeah, Bretton Woods was a manifestation of the rise of America and America's absolute power post-war. Bretton Woods was just a manifestation of it, as was many other, like the World Trade, the trade agreements that occurred, the financial. Look, the financial structure of Bretton Woods really changed dramatically in the early 70s when we went off the gold standard. So Bretton Woods was not, the conference itself wasn't as formative as the evolution of that structure, which we call Bretton Woods. We give it the label.
Yeah,
But
and it may have started with a military framework, but the economy built on top of that, and that's what set the new world order as we know of it, and all of these agreements, etc., and the political alliances and the agreements and all of that were built on top again.
Yeah, but we're in the midst of reforming it. I mean, that's what Trumpism is all about, right? He's trying to withdraw the American primacy in Europe, withdraw from primacy in Europe. He's trying to make Europe stand up and take control. And, we may be sorry for that later, but that's what he's doing. And certainly...
the reason I ask you about that is because we're seeing a set of circumstances and technological enabling factors that are so transformative that there's nothing really to compare it to in the past. When you're looking at, so far, you've had to rely on human ingenuity and labor, which is not necessarily going to be the case in the future. And in that scenario, I wonder what sort of structures we will have and what form a Bretton Woods Part 2 would take. And that would not necessarily be just for Earth, but also for outer space.
Royden, when you talk about those levels of changes, generally they're precipitated by war.
Yes.
So it's not a
Unfortunately,
very
yes.
comforting thought.
No, it isn't. But it's
Very
inevitable in so many ways.
Very seldom has a global order been implemented without a massive amount of destruction of the old order. And you can go back in history a long ways to see that.
Yeah.
So that's very sobering thought. It's a very sobering thought.
It is, but it's the natural evolution of our species, isn't it?
We don't know. We don't know. Maybe we've evolved beyond that. It doesn't look like it, doesn't seem like it, but
Larry, you're too much of an optimist on this one.
well, I can afford to be. At my age, it's very easy to discount anything in the future because it's not that many more years that one has to survive, that one has to look for. Anyway.
Oh, come on. May you live to be 150, Larry. They say if you live for another 10 years, you'll live for another 50 years, given the pace of evolution of medicine.
I'm very deeply involved in medical technology and medical evolution development. I
know that was a gentle nudge.
Yeah. So I think that we are making progress, but I doubt we'll make progress at that rate.
So when Elon talks about Optimus being the best surgeon that could be available to anybody and everybody.
Surgery is not our problem. Our problem is understanding the cell. The trillions of cells that we have in our body, each of them are sufficiently complex that we haven't unraveled those secrets yet. And we're talking about 1 trillion of them. So, I'm just using the number loosely. The trillion is kind of unbelievable, unimaginable number. But the complexity of each of those cells still defeats us. And the more we unravel, the more we discover we have to unravel. So it took 4 billion years for us to get here. It's very hard to see how the human mind in the next 20 years or 30 years or 80 years is going to be able to unravel that billion years of evolution. But we're on the, we're on the task. We're trying to do it, but it's going to take a while. I'm very optimistic, but not that optimistic.
Do you think Elon will venture into this area?
He's in it.
Well, not through Neuralink, but I mean into the pharmacies, the pharmaceutical aspect of it, the drug, the pharmacological, the drug discovery using AI.
He hasn't really shown the propensity to pursue that area. But boy, could it use some pursuit. There are so many of these bio farm companies that they're not getting there financially. It needs rethinking. Definitely.
Yeah, look at Neuralink. It's a case in point. People have been working on brain-computer interfaces for decades. Along comes Elon, and he somehow seems to be able to center the right amount of intelligence, attention, effort, and money into it.
There are quite a few brain interface companies around. There are several others that are competitive.
Yeah.
None of them have reached the point that Neuralink are at. And I think there are so many different approaches to the problem, but there are many, many problems. So we haven't begun to understand how to treat the brain. There are going to be some incredible discoveries in the next, decade in that field. And I'm very, very interested in that field in general.
Well, Larry, from a societal point of view, we need to learn how to treat the mind better before we can treat the brain.
From your lips. From your lips.
Oh, this has been such a fascinating, such a rewarding conversation with you, Larry. I know, I mean, I could talk to you till the cows come home, right?
Well, we
But,
kind of have. It's
I
gone
see we
on
kind
for
of
a
have,
while.
yes, we have. But that just goes to show just how impactful Elon and his companies
Yeah,
are on
yeah.
our times. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface,
Yeah.
to be honest, on the convergence and what it means for humanity as a whole.
It's going to be an incredible couple of years, the next 5, 10 years of Elon's companies. And I'm hoping to be around to see the next phase evolve. I'm all in on Starship. I've been to 5 of the launches now, and I intend to be at the next launch and many more besides. I'd like to see us get to a cadence, of 100 Starships a year, and then a cadence of 1,000 Starships a year. I think there's an evolution beyond Starship. I think this is the end of chemical rockets.
Yeah.
I think there's an evolution beyond chemical rockets, and Elon hasn't turned his mind to that yet, because this is such a huge challenge, getting this off the ground and getting it functional. Blue Origin are very proud to shoot off 1 rocket every year, or hopefully they get to 1 a month or whatever. Elon won't be happy until he gets to 100 a day.
That's the other thing. I mean, there's so much to talk about, because I look at the Artemis Accords, and what is the Artemis Accords without Starship?
I mean, we could do a whole nother show about Starship. Believe
We
me.
ought to. We ought to.
Well, I'd be happy to do it.
And I would be happy to talk to you anytime.
Well,
I'll
it's
let
been
you
a
go
lot
for
of-
now, Larry. Thank you so much. It's been
lot of
such a
fun.
pleasure.
It's been a
And
lot of fun.
I can't wait till the next time we catch up, honestly. Thank you.
Thank you.